Found out my husband got his assistant pregnant, donated his stuff to Goodwill. That's the short version anyway. The sanitized headline I'd use if I ever decided to post this story online, which I guess I'm doing right now. The reality was messier. South, much. Messier. You know that feeling when your entire life implodes and somehow you're just standing there watching it burn? That was me 3 weeks ago, my fingers clutching a receipt like it was the only solid thing left in my universe. Let me back up. David and I had been married for 8 years. The kind of marriage other people pretended to have on Instagram, college sweethearts who actually made it. The power couple with matching coffee mugs and weekend getaways to wine country. He ran his own marketing firm that had finally taken off last year, and I'd built my photography business from the ground up. We were that annoyingly perfect duo everyone secretly hates. At least that's what I thought. It started with the credit card statement. Not the most original beginning to an infidelity story, I know, but clichés become clichés for a reason. David had always handled our joint finances. His MBA made him better suited for it, apparently, but last month he'd been swamped with this massive airline campaign, so I offered to pay the bills. That's when I saw it, a $412 charge from Tiffany & Company. My birthday had passed months ago. Our anniversary wasn't for another 3 months. And David had never once mentioned buying me anything from Tiffany's. The heat rose in my chest, that uncomfortable flush that crawls up your neck when you know something's wrong, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. I told myself it was a surprise. People in happy marriages surprise each other with expensive jewelry all the time, right? So why was my stomach suddenly a block of ice? I checked our shared calendar. We'd been using the same Google Calendar for years, color-coded by person and priority. There it was. Lunch with Melissa, 1 p.m. On the day of the Tiffany purchase, Melissa, his new assistant. The one he'd hired 4 months ago. The one he kept mentioning in random conversations. The one whose name somehow managed to slip into discussions about completely unrelated topics. Melissa, who helped him pick out the perfect client gifts. Melissa, who found that amazing new lunch spot. Melissa, who was so organized and efficient. Melissa, who was apparently worth a $412 Tiffany purchase. I wish I could say I confronted him immediately with the poise and righteous fury of a woman who knows her worth. But what I actually did was spend 3 days in detective mode, gathering evidence like my life depended on it. Because suddenly it felt like it did. I checked his email when he was in the shower, scanned his texts when he left his phone to charge, started noting his late nights at the office and the increasing frequency of client dinners. I became the very thing I'd always despised, the suspicious, paranoid wife. But here's the kicker. Paranoid doesn't mean wrong. The universe delivered the final proof in the most mundane way possible. David had sent his suit to the dry cleaners and asked me to pick it up since I'd be near there for a client meeting. The elderly Korean woman behind the counter handed me his navy wool suit in plastic wrap with a sympathetic smile. "Lipstick very hard to remove," she said, pointing to the collar. "But we got it." I nodded numbly, not processing her words until I was halfway to my car. Lipstick. On his collar. I don't even wear lipstick. The plastic wrap crinkled in my white-knuckled grip as I stood there in the parking lot, my lungs forgetting how to function. Some detached part of my brain noted how pathetically cliché this was. Lipstick on the collar. Might as well have found a pair of panties in his pocket. I drove home in a fog, the suit hanging in my peripheral vision like a dead thing. When I pulled into our driveway, our perfect suburban driveway with the basketball hoop he'd installed for our future kids, something in me snapped. I called his office. "David Clark's office, this is Melissa speaking." Her voice was exactly as I'd imagined it. Young, bubbly, confident. I hung up without speaking. Then I did something I'd never done before. I drove to his office unannounced. 12 floors up in a gleaming downtown building, the kind with a security guard who checks IDs, but everyone knew me there. Mrs. Clark! So nice to see you. Go right up. The elevator ride lasted an eternity. Each floor dinged past like countdown to detonation. My reflection in the polished doors showed a woman I barely recognized, wild-eyed, hair disheveled from running nervous hands through it, cheeks flushed with equal parts humiliation and rage. The doors opened directly into the reception area of Clark Marketing Solutions. And there she was, Melissa, early 20s. Shiny brown hair, impeccable makeup including, you guessed it, red lipstick, and a small but unmistakable bump under her fitted pencil skirt. Our eyes met, and something passed between us, woman to woman, a flicker of recognition. She knew that I knew. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach before she caught herself. "Can I help you?" she asked, but her voice had lost its receptionist perkiness. I walked past her without a word, straight to David's corner office. He was on the phone, feet up on the desk, laughing that special laugh he used to reserve for me. He looked up, saw me, and the laugh died in his throat. "I'll call you back," he said to the person on the line, his eyes never leaving mine. The silence that followed was dense enough to cut with a knife. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there, taking in the face of the man I'd loved for a decade, searching for some trace of the person I thought I knew. "How far along is she?" I finally asked. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. "Emma, I can explain." "How far along?" He swallowed. 4 months. 4 months. The same time she'd been working for him. The timing wasn't lost on me. "Is it yours?" A stupid question. I already knew the answer. Yes, at least he had the decency not to lie. But it wasn't planned. It just happened. It was a mistake. A mistake. Like forgetting to pick up milk. Like sending an email to the wrong person. Not like creating an entire human being with someone who wasn't your wife. "Does she know you're married?" Another stupid question. Of course she knows. Everyone at the office knows. And there it was. Everyone knew. Everyone except me. I nodded slowly, processing this information with an eerie calm that should have frightened me. "I'll be gone when you get home tonight. Take your time." I turned to leave, my body moving on autopilot. "Emma, wait. Please. We can work through this." I looked back at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. "Work through this?" "She's 4 months pregnant with your child, David. What exactly is your plan here?" He ran his hands through his hair, the same nervous gesture I'd been doing in the elevator. "I don't know. I don't know, okay? This isn't how I wanted you to find out." "Oh, I'm sorry. Was there a better way for me to discover you've been fucking your assistant? Maybe a group text? Or an announcement at Christmas dinner?" His face hardened. There it was, the flash of anger that always appeared when his carefully constructed narrative was challenged. "You haven't exactly been present in this marriage either, Emma. All those late nights with your clients, those weekend photo shoots. When was the last time we actually connected?" And there it was. Somehow this was my fault. My successful career, the one he'd always claimed to support, was now his justification for infidelity. I laughed, a hollow sound that bounced off the glass walls of his office. "Wow. Just wow. Good luck with your new family, David. I hope she doesn't get too busy with motherhood. You might have to find yourself a nanny to screw next." I walked out, past shocked employee faces, past Melissa who couldn't meet my eyes, past the security guard who called out a cheerful, "Have a nice day," to my retreating back. The drive home was a blur. The house, our house, loomed before me like a movie set, a perfect facade hiding an empty interior. I went straight to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his side of the closet. The neat rows of expensive suits, the color-coordinated ties, the collection of watches displayed on a custom rack I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. All these possessions that represented the man I thought I'd married. Successful, put together, faithful. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, slightly manic around the edges. What would the perfect wronged wife do in this situation? Set his clothes on fire in the front yard? Cut the crotch out of all his pants? Trash his precious car? I lay back on the bed, our bed, and stared at the ceiling. The rage would come later, I knew. The crushing grief, too. But right now, all I felt was a strange, detached clarity. I didn't want drama. I didn't want revenge, not yet anyway. First, I needed him gone, erased. The thought of touching his things, of packing them up like a dutiful soon-to-be ex-wife, made my skin crawl. That's when I saw the Goodwill donation receipt on his nightstand. David had apparently dropped off some old electronics last weekend, always the conscientious recycler, my husband. Even while destroying our marriage, he remained environmentally responsible. The idea formed with perfect crystalline clarity. I picked up my phone and called my brother, Mike. "I need your truck and a few hours of your time. Don't ask questions. Just come over." Mike, bless him, didn't ask questions. He arrived 30 minutes later, took one look at my face, and simply said, "What are we moving?" "Everything that belongs to David." Mike raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Garage or storage unit?" "Goodwill." His other eyebrow joined the first. "All of it?" "Every last thing." We started with his clothes. Designer suits, custom shirts, shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Then his precious book collection, first editions he'd been gathering since college. Electronics, sports equipment, the vinyl records he'd been collecting since high school. The truck filled up quickly. We made the first run to Goodwill, where the attendant's eyes widened at our haul. "Spring cleaning," I explained with a brittle smile. Back at the house, we tackled his home office. The ergonomic chair that cost $2,000, the standing desk, his awards and plaques, the framed photo of us on our honeymoon. That one I smashed, the only moment of dramatic indulgence I allowed myself. By evening, the house was eerily empty of his presence. No trace of David remained except for the things we'd bought together: the couch, the dining table, the bed I'd strip and replace with new linens. Mike helped me clean up the last of it, then pulled me into a tight hug. "Want to tell me what happened?" I shook my head against his shoulder. "Not yet." "Need me to kill him?" His tone was light, but I knew the offer was sincere. "Not yet on that either." After Mike left, I sat alone in my half-empty house, emotionally exhausted but mind-racing. The reality of my situation was sinking in. My marriage was over. My husband had not only cheated, but created a new life with someone else. All our plans, our dreams, our inside jokes, and shared history, it meant nothing. The tears finally came then, hot and fierce. I sobbed until my throat burned and my eyes swelled shut, curled in a ball on the kitchen floor because I couldn't bear to lie in our bed. I cried for the past I'd lost and the future that would never be, for the children we'd planned to have, for the woman I'd been just that morning, trusting, happy, oblivious. When the tears finally subsided, I felt hollowed out, empty, but somehow lighter. My phone pinged with a text. "David, working late tonight? Don't wait up?" I laughed through the remnants of tears. "Working late? Sure." I didn't bother responding. Another ping. "Did you pick up my suit?" I looked at the navy suit, still hanging in its plastic wrap, the only item of his clothing I'd kept, the evidence of his betrayal preserved for posterity. "Yes," I replied. "It's here waiting for you?" I wandered through the house, touching the spaces where his things had been. With each empty shelf and vacant hanger, my breathing came easier. This house was mine now, my space, my life. David would come home eventually to find his possessions gone, his presence erased. He would rage. He would demand explanations. He would threaten legal action. Let him. I wasn't the same woman who'd woken up this morning. That woman was gone, donated along with his designer suits and leather-bound books. In her place stood someone new, someone with nothing left to lose and all the time in the world to plan her next move. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Donating his stuff to Goodwill? That was just the beginning. I slept on the couch that night, if you can call it sleep. More like fitful dozing, punctuated by waves of rage so intense they jolted me upright, gasping for air. The digital clock on the cable box tracked my descent into sleepless madness. 1:17 a.m., 2:43 a.m., 4:06 a.m. David never came home. By sunrise, I'd moved through the initial shock and settled into something colder, more calculated. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving a strange clarity in its wake. I made coffee, in my mug, not his matching one, that was currently being unpacked at Goodwill, and sat at our kitchen island, scrolling through my phone. 16 missed calls from David, starting around midnight when he presumably came home to find his life erased. A barrage of texts, their tone evolving from confusion to anger to desperate pleading. "Where is all my stuff? Emma, what the hell is going on? Answer your phone! This isn't funny. You can't just throw away someone's possessions. This is legally theft. Please call me back so we can talk about this like adults. Emma, I'm worried about you. Baby, please. Baby, please." I nearly hurled my phone across the room. The last text came at 4:32 a.m. "I'm staying at the Marriott downtown. When you're ready to talk like a rational person, let me know." Rational person. Right. Because impregnating your assistant is the pinnacle of rationality. I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop. First search, divorce lawyers near me. Second search, community property state laws. Third search, how to financially protect yourself during divorce. My methodical research was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Not David's knock. He would have used his key, assuming he hadn't lost that too. I opened it to find Melissa standing on my porch, looking simultaneously terrified and determined. Up close, her pregnancy was more noticeable than I'd initially thought. She couldn't have been more than 24, her face still holding traces of college girl softness despite the professional attire. "Mrs. Clark," she began, then seemed to realize the awkwardness of using my married name. "Emma, I thought we should talk." The audacity was almost impressive. I leaned against the doorframe, making no move to invite her in. "About what exactly?" Your interior decorating plans for my house? Your registry preferences? How you like your eggs in the morning?" She flinched but held her ground. "About David. About the situation." "The situation?" I repeated flatly. "Is that what we're calling it? Not the affair or the betrayal or the complete destruction of an 8-year marriage?" "I didn't know he was going to leave you," she blurted out. "When we started, when it happened, he said things weren't good between you two, that you were basically roommates, that you'd been growing apart for years." "Of course he did. The Classic Cheater's Handbook, page 1. And you believe that?" She looked down at her sensible black flats. I wanted to. A heavy silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant sound of a lawnmower from down the street. Normal Saturday morning sounds in a world that had stopped being normal. "What do you want, Melissa?" I finally asked, suddenly exhausted. "Absolution? Permission? My blessing? I want you to know I never meant to hurt you." Her hand drifted to her stomach in that unconscious gesture of new mothers. "And I want you to know that David's really upset about his things. He said you donated everything." His grandmother's watch was in his dresser drawer. The watch. I'd forgotten about the vintage Cartier that had belonged to his grandmother, the one family heirloom he actually cared about. "Good. I'm sure Goodwill will find it a loving home," I said sweetly. "Perhaps with someone who appreciates fidelity as much as fine timepieces." Her eyes widened slightly. "He's talking about pressing charges." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "For what? Donating my cheating husband's possessions after finding out he knocked up his secretary? Please let him try. I'd love to see how that plays in divorce court." "Assistant," she corrected automatically, then blushed. "Right. Assistant. Much more respectable." She took a deep breath. "Look, I didn't come here to fight. I thought maybe we could find a way through this that doesn't involve lawyers and criminal charges and scorched earth. We're all adults." I studied her face, the earnest expression, the hope that somehow this could be resolved neatly. She really was young. "Melissa," I said, keeping my voice gentle, "you're standing on the porch of the home I built with my husband, carrying his child, asking me to be reasonable about the fact that you've both blown up my entire life. There is no adult way through this. There's just through it." Her eyes filled with tears. Pregnancy hormones, probably. I refused to feel sympathy. "He loves me," she whispered, as if that changed anything. As if that made it better instead of worse. "I'm sure he does," I replied. "He loved me once too. Good luck with that." I closed the door before she could respond, leaning my forehead against the cool wood until I heard her car start and pull away. Then I slid down to the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of breakdown, harsh, racking sobs that left me gasping for air. When my phone alarm chimed the end of my allotted crying time, I stood up, washed my face, and returned to my laptop. I had work to do. The next week passed in a blur of ruthless efficiency. I met with 3 divorce attorneys before selecting Catherine Westbrook, a shark in an Armani suit who specialized in high-asset divorces involving infidelity. Her office walls were decorated with thank you notes from clients and news clippings about her victories. "So he got his assistant pregnant," she summarized after I'd laid out the basics. "And in response, you donated all his possessions to Goodwill." "Yes." A hint of a smile touched her perfectly lined lips. "Including items of considerable value and sentimental importance." "Yes. That was ill-advised from a legal standpoint. I know, but understandable from a human one." She made a note on her legal pad. "We'll call it a crime of passion if it comes up. One-time emotional response to extreme provocation. The pregnancy provides excellent context for your state of mind." I nodded, grateful for her lack of judgment. "Now," she continued, "all business. Let's talk strategy. Community property state means assets acquired during marriage are split 50-50 regardless of fault. However, his infidelity gives us leverage in negotiations. Most men in his position will give up financial claims to avoid public embarrassment, especially with a business reputation to protect. And if he doesn't care about embarrassment?" She fixed me with a steely gaze. "Everyone cares about embarrassment when it affects their bottom line. Clients tend to avoid marketing firms run by men with messy public scandals involving pregnant assistants and enraged wives." I liked her immediately. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Everything. Bank statements, investment accounts, property records, business valuations, tax returns, and any evidence of the affair you can provide." I slid a USB drive across her desk. "It's all there. I've been preparing since the day I found out." Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. "Most clients come to me in pieces. You come bearing spreadsheets." I shrugged. Photography is my art. Spreadsheets are my therapy. With the legal wheels in motion, I turned my attention to the practical aspects of disentangling my life from David's. I froze our joint accounts and opened new ones in my name only. I redirected my business income to those new accounts. I changed the locks on the house, installed a security system, and removed David as my emergency contact on everything from my gym membership to my life insurance policy. Each administrative task felt like cutting another cord that had bound us together. Snip, snip, snip. Then came the harder part, telling people. I started with my parents, a painful video call that left my mother in tears and my father tight-lipped with suppressed rage. We never liked him. Mom finally admitted after the initial shock had worn off. What? You both adored David. We adored that you adored him. Dad corrected. There's a difference. Why didn't you say something? Mom exchanged a look with Dad. Honey, would you have listened? You were head over heels. And it wasn't like he was abusive or anything tangible we could point to. He was just slick. Too perfect. Too concerned with appearances, Dad added. Men like that care more about how their life looks than how it actually is. Their assessment stung with its accuracy. Had I been so blinded by the perfect image of our relationship that I'd missed who David really was? Telling friends was its own special circle of hell. Some responded with appropriate outrage and offers to slash his tires. Others awkwardly admitted they'd heard rumors but hadn't wanted to upset me. A few, couples we'd been friends with for years, suddenly became busy. When I suggested getting together, apparently infidelity was contagious, or at least made for uncomfortable dinner conversation. The most surprising reaction came from my assistant at the photography studio, Zoe, who simply nodded when I told her and said, I know. You know? I blinked at her. How? She shifted uncomfortably. I saw them together about a month ago, at Rossini's. Rossini's, our favorite date night restaurant. The place David had taken me for our last anniversary. Why didn't you tell me? My voice came out harsher than intended. Zoe looked miserable. I convinced myself I was misinterpreting things, that maybe it was a business meeting. And then, she trailed off. And then, I prompted. And then I saw how happy you were. How you were always talking about your future plans together. I didn't want to be the one to shatter that if I wasn't 100% sure. I wanted to be angry with her, but couldn't summon the energy. How many others had seen them together? How many people had pitied me while I remained oblivious, planning vacations and talking about starting a family? The humiliation burned worse than the betrayal some days. 2 weeks after D-Day, Discovery Day, as I'd started calling it in my head, David ambushed me outside my studio as I was leaving work. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing clothes that clearly weren't his usual designer labels, with dark circles under his eyes. Good. We need to talk, he said, blocking my path to my car. That's what phones are for. And lawyers. Emma, please. 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed to coffee at the shop next door. Public enough to prevent a scene, private enough for conversation. We sat at a corner table, my back to the wall like I was expecting an attack. Which, emotionally speaking, I was. You've ruined me, he began, which was definitely not the opening statement his crisis manager would have advised. My clothes, my books, my watch. Do you have any idea what you've done? Cleaned house? I suggested, stirring my latte. His jaw tightened. This isn't funny. My grandmother's watch was irreplaceable. So was our marriage, I countered. Didn't stop you from tossing it away. He ran a hand through his unwashed hair. I never meant for any of this to happen. And yet you made a series of deliberate choices that led directly to this outcome. Funny how that works. It was a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, David. Sleeping with your assistant repeatedly and getting her pregnant is a choice. Several choices actually made day after day. He had the grace to look ashamed, at least. I know it looks bad. Looks bad? I laughed incredulously. It doesn't look bad, David. It is bad. Objectively, fundamentally bad. I still love you, he said quietly. Part of me always will. Something cold and hard settled in my chest. You don't even know what that word means. I do. I got caught up in something I couldn't control. Here's what I think happened, I said, leaning forward. I think you hired a young, pretty assistant who worshipped the ground you walked on. I think your ego loved the attention. I think you enjoyed playing mentor, then protector, then lover. I think you told yourself our marriage was already broken to justify breaking it further. And I think when she got pregnant, you convinced yourself it was fate rather than a consequence of your actions." His silence confirmed I'd hit the mark. "What do you want, David?" I finally asked. "Why are we having this conversation?" He looked down at his untouched coffee. "I want us to handle this with dignity. The divorce, I mean. Dignity." I rolled the word around like a sour candy. "Bit late for that, isn't it? Catherine Westbrook, Emma? Really? She's a piranha. She's exactly what I need right now." He sighed heavily. "Look, I know you're hurt. Hurt doesn't begin to cover it. But scorched earth benefits neither of us. We built a life together. 8 years. That has to count for something." I studied him. This man I'd once known better than myself, or thought I had. "It counted for everything to me," I said quietly. "That's why I'm sitting here feeling like my insides have been hollowed out with a rusty spoon. But here's what I've realized, David. You don't get to betray someone utterly and then ask them to make your life easier in the aftermath." "What do you want?" he asked, an edge of desperation in his voice. "Money? The house? What will it take to end this civilly?" I considered the question carefully. What did I want? Revenge had been my first instinct, the Goodwill donation my opening salvo. But sitting across from him now, seeing the wreckage of the man I'd loved, I realized something important. Revenge wouldn't heal me. It might satisfy something primal and wounded, but it wouldn't restore what I'd lost. Still civil? After what he'd done? "I want what I'm legally entitled to," I said finally. "Half of everything we built together. And I want you to be honest, with yourself, with Melissa, with everyone, about what actually happened. No more we grew apart or it just happened narratives. You chose this. Own it." His face darkened. "And if I don't?" I smiled then, not pleasantly. "Then I burn it all down. Your professional reputation, your client relationships, your carefully constructed image. I may not be able to get more than 50% legally, but I can make sure paying me that 50% hurts a whole lot more than it has to." "You wouldn't." "I donated your grandmother's watch to Goodwill, David. What exactly do you think I wouldn't do?" He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. The Emma he'd married wouldn't have threatened him. She would have cried and begged him to reconsider. She would have blamed herself for not being enough. That Emma was gone. "I need to get back to work," I said, standing up. "Have your lawyer call mine." "Wait," he said, reaching for my arm. I sidestepped his touch. "The house. I want to talk about the house." Ah, there it was. The real reason for this meeting. "What about it?" "I think I should get it in the settlement." "I found it. I handled the renovation. With my design input and both our money," I interrupted. "And now with the baby coming, we need the space. The casual use of that pronoun, now applied to him and Melissa, hit me like a slap. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You want me to give up my home so you can move your pregnant girlfriend into the house you shared with your wife?" He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "When you put it like that, how else is there to put it? It makes financial sense, Emma. You're one person. We'll be 3. The cold calculation behind his reasoning left me momentarily speechless. He was already counting his new family, already planning their life in our home, as if I were simply an inconvenient obstacle to his happiness rather than the person he'd vowed to love forever. In that moment, watching him rationalize the unforgivable, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just about surviving the divorce anymore. This wasn't just about fair division of assets. This man, this stranger wearing my husband's face, needed to understand the consequences of his actions on a visceral level. He needed to lose something he truly valued: the house, his business, his reputation, his comfortable transition from one family to the next. "I'll see you in court," I said quietly, and walked away as he called my name. Back in my car, I sat with my hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing deeply through the rage. The conversation had clarified something important. David wasn't sorry he'd hurt me. He was sorry he was facing consequences. I pulled out my phone and called Catherine. "We need to talk strategy," I said when she answered. "I'm done playing nice." Her chuckle held no humor. "Nice was never on the table, Emma. The question is, how not nice are you prepared to get?" I thought about David's face when he'd casually suggested I surrender our home to his new family, about the easy way he'd divided the world into his needs versus mine, with his automatically taking precedence. "Whatever it takes," I answered. "I want him to remember this divorce every time he looks in the mirror." "That's what I like to hear," Catherine said. "Meet me at my office in an hour. And bring any dirt you haven't already shared." As I started the car, a strange sense of purpose filled me. For weeks I'd been reacting. To the discovery, to the betrayal, to David's actions. Now it was time to act. To take control of this narrative and reshape it on my terms. The Emma who walked into that coffee shop might have been willing to settle for a clean break and a fair division of assets. The Emma who walked out was planning a reckoning. Game on, David. Game on. The discovery that your cheating husband wants to move his pregnant mistress into your renovated dream home really clarifies things. There's betrayal, and then there's audacity. David's request for the house was the match that lit my gasoline-soaked determination. I'd been playing defense, reacting to his infidelity, his lies, his demands. Time to switch to offense. Catherine's office became my war room over the next few days. We spread financial documents across her massive mahogany desk, creating battle plans that would make military strategists proud. Your husband's business is the soft underbelly, Catherine explained, tapping a pile of tax returns. Clark Marketing Solutions is valued at approximately $3.2 million, having doubled in the last 2 years. As his spouse during this growth period, you're entitled to half its value. I don't want to run a marketing company, I said. Of course not. She smiled like a predator. But you can own half of one, or force him to buy you out at market value. Either way, it creates leverage. Leverage, my new favorite word. Catherine helped me understand the full arsenal at my disposal: financial discovery, depositions, forensic accounting, legal warfare designed to unearth every secret and apply maximum pressure. But something was still missing. Something personal. I need information, I realized aloud. About the business. About his clients. About what he's saying to people. Catherine raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. Anything you obtain through deceptive means would be inadmissible in court. I'm not talking about court. I met her gaze steadily. I'm talking about knowing my enemy. She leaned back, studying me thoughtfully. I didn't hear that, and I'm certainly not advising you to do anything extrajudicial. She shuffled some papers. However, spouses often have legitimate access to business information through shared devices, joint accounts, and mutual connections. Message received. That night, I made a list of resources at my disposal. 1. David's old laptop, technically mine since I'd purchased it for his birthday. 2. Passwords I'd accumulated over 8 years of marriage. 3. Industry connections through my photography business. 4. His former assistant, Jeremy, who David had unceremoniously replaced with Melissa. 5. My own reputation as David's wife. In business circles by morning, I had a plan. First stop, Jeremy. He'd worked for David for 3 years before being abruptly restructured out of his position 4 months ago, right when Melissa appeared. I found him through LinkedIn, now working as a marketing coordinator for a smaller firm across town. I reached out under the pretense of needing photography consultation for my business rebrand. We met at a brewery with industrial chic vibes and enough ambient noise to ensure privacy. Jeremy was thin and stylish, with the perpetually exhausted look of someone who'd survived working for a narcissist. Mrs. Clark? He greeted me with genuine warmth. It's good to see you. Emma, please. And David and I are no longer together. Understanding dawned immediately. Ah, is the new assistant involved by any chance? I nodded, taking a sip of my craft beer. Called that one, he muttered. Sorry, that was unprofessional. Let's dispense with professional, I suggested. I'm guessing you have thoughts about your former boss? The floodgates opened. Jeremy had suspected David was having an affair long before Melissa officially joined the company. He'd seen them together at industry events, noticed the lingering glances, the inside jokes. Then suddenly Jeremy was being criticized for communication issues and not aligning with the company vision. He set me up to fail, Jeremy said bitterly. Started excluding me from meetings, assigning impossible deadlines, moving my projects to other team members. Classic constructive dismissal tactics. Why didn't you sue? References. Jeremy shrugged. Marketing's a small world. I needed to eat more than I needed justice. I nodded, understanding completely. What if you could have both? His eyes narrowed. I'm listening. 2 hours and several beers later, we had an arrangement. Jeremy would reach out to former colleagues still at Clark Marketing, gathering intel under the guise of professional networking. He'd document everything: inappropriate workplace conduct, misrepresented client billings, strategic plans David had shared with Melissa that should have been confidential, all perfectly legal information gathering from willing participants, all devastating in the right context. In return, I'd help Jeremy establish his freelance business with referrals and photography services. Win-win. My next move required more finesse. David had always insisted on handling our taxes, including those for my photography business, which operated as an LLC. I'd reviewed the returns perfunctorily each year before signing, trusting him to maximize our deductions legally. Now I wondered what else I might have blindly endorsed. I scheduled an appointment with a forensic accountant recommended by Catherine. Bernard Peterson had the demeanor of a kindly grandfather and the razor-sharp mind of an FBI investigator. I handed over 5 years of tax returns, bank statements, and business records. "What exactly are we looking for, Mrs. Clark?" he asked, adjusting his reading glasses. "Discrepancies. Creative accounting. Anything that doesn't add up. And if I find something, then I'll have choices to make." Bernard called 3 days later, his gentle voice belying the bomb he was about to drop. "Mrs. Clark, are you aware that your husband has been underreporting Clark Marketing's income by approximately 22% for the past 3 years?" My heart raced. No, I wasn't aware. He's been running significant client payments through a secondary business entity, Clark Consulting Group, registered in Wyoming. This entity doesn't appear on your joint tax returns, despite your married filing status. Is that illegal? The structure itself isn't necessarily illegal, though questionable. The failure to report this income on your joint returns, however, that's tax fraud. He paused. And since you signed those returns, I closed my eyes. I'm equally liable. Potentially, yes, though a case could certainly be made that you were an unwitting participant. I thanked Bernard for his thoroughness and immediately called Catherine to relay what I'd learned. Her response was immediate. "This changes everything. Tax fraud allegations can trigger IRS involvement, which neither of you want. But as leverage in a divorce settlement? Golden." While these legal wheels turned, I focused on another front: social warfare. David had always been obsessed with his image, his standing in the community, how others perceived him. Time to hit him where it would really hurt. I waited until I knew he had an important client dinner, then showed up at the restaurant, Rossini's of course, with Mike. My brother played his role perfectly, being attentive and making me laugh just as David glanced over and noticed us. I wore a red dress David had always loved, my hair styled differently than I'd ever worn it during our marriage. David's expression was priceless. Shock, confusion, then barely concealed rage as he attempted to maintain his professional demeanor with clients. I pretended not to notice him, engaged in animated conversation with Mike, occasionally touching his arm for emphasis. Just friends, obviously, but would David's clients know that? I signed the check with a flourish when we finished, making sure to catch David's eye as we left. Childish? Perhaps. Satisfying? Absolutely. The next morning, I had flowers delivered to Melissa at the office, a lush arrangement with a card reading, "Wishing you strength through this difficult time. Self-respect is worth more than any relationship." I signed it simply, "A friend who understands." Small psychological warfare tactics designed not to harm but to unsettle, to remind them both that I wasn't fading quietly into the background of their new life. Meanwhile, my legal strategy advanced methodically. Catherine filed motions requesting detailed financial discovery, business valuations, and client lists. She scheduled David's deposition, ensuring it conflicted with his biggest annual client presentation, forcing him to choose between legal obligations and professional commitments. His lawyer, a pinch-faced man named Gregory with a comb-over and condescending attitude, called Catherine 3 times trying to reschedule. Each time, she expressed deep regret that her calendar simply wouldn't permit any flexibility. "You know what they say," she told me with a wink. "Prior planning prevents poor performance." 2 weeks into this multi-pronged attack, David finally cracked. He called me directly, breaking protocol by bypassing our lawyers. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, his voice tight with restrained fury. "Following legal process for our divorce," I replied calmly. "Is there a problem?" "You know damn well there's a problem. The deposition date, the financial discovery requests, the ... The flowers to Melissa?" She was upset for days, thinking someone at work knew about the pregnancy. "How inconsiderate of this mystery person," I murmured, making her uncomfortable at work with unwanted attention. "Imagine how that feels. Emma, stop playing games. What do you want?" There it was again, the assumption that this was a negotiation where he held the power, that I was creating problems just to be difficult, not because I was entitled to financial transparency and legal process. "I want what I'm legally entitled to, David. Half of everything we built together, including your business. I want the house that I found and helped renovate. I want you to face consequences for once in your charmed life." His breathing was audible through the phone. "And the tax issues Bernard Peterson has been investigating? Is that part of your revenge too? So he knew about Bernard. Interesting. Those tax issues are your doing, not mine," I said evenly. Though I admit I'm curious how the IRS might view our returns if they were to audit them. The silence that followed told me everything. He was calculating risks, weighing options, finally understanding the precariousness of his position. "What would it take?" he finally asked, "to resolve this quickly and privately?" "Meet me tomorrow," I said. "Neutral territory. No lawyers. Then we'll see if there's a path forward that doesn't involve the IRS, your clients learning about your creative accounting, and a very public exploration of workplace harassment policies." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in a neighborhood neither of us frequented. When I arrived, David was already there, looking haggard in a way his expensive haircut and tailored shirt couldn't disguise. The past month had aged him 5 years. Good. I sat down across from him, placing a folder on the table between us. "What's that?" he asked warily. "My terms," I replied. "Non-negotiable." He opened the folder, scanning the document inside, a settlement agreement drafted by Catherine but presented without her letterhead. His expression darkened as he read. "This is highway robbery," he said finally. I tilted my head. "Is it? Let's review. You get to keep your business intact, though you'll need to take out a loan to buy out my share. You keep your client relationships. You keep your professional reputation. You avoid IRS scrutiny of your creative accounting practices. In exchange, I get the house free and clear, 60% of our liquid assets, and a clean break. 60% is more than you're entitled to. Consider it the asshole tax," I replied pleasantly. "Entirely optional, of course. We could go to court instead, where everything becomes public record." He stared at me like I was a stranger. I suppose I was. "When did you become this person?" he asked quietly. "When did you—" I countered. We sat in silence, the weight of our failed marriage pressing down between us. 8 years reduced to percentages and property divisions and mutual assured destruction. "Melissa lost the baby," he said abruptly. The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever I'd expected him to say, it wasn't that. "What?" "Last week. Miscarriage." His voice was flat. "Doctor said it happens sometimes. Nothing anyone did wrong. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me, a small, vindictive part I wasn't proud of, felt a flash of savage satisfaction that their perfect new family had already hit a roadblock. But mostly I felt nothing. A dull acknowledgement of information that no longer had the power to wound me. "I'm sorry," I said finally, because it seemed like the human thing to say. He nodded, eyes fixed on the settlement papers. "We're still together. Going to try again eventually." "I didn't ask." "I know. He looked up. "I wanted you to know it wasn't just sex. It wasn't meaningless." "That doesn't make it better, David. That makes it worse." He flinched. "I deserve that." "You deserve a lot more than that," I said evenly. "But I'm not interested in being the delivery system for your karma anymore." I tapped the folder. "Sign this and we're done. No more psychological warfare. No more legal maneuvers. No IRS involvement. Clean break." David stared at the papers for a long moment, then pulled out a pen. "I'll need my lawyer to review the final version." "Of course. This is just to confirm we have an agreement in principle." As he signed, I felt a strange lightness spreading through me. Not happiness exactly. More like the absence of a weight I'd been carrying for too long. "There's one more thing," I said as he capped his pen. "Jeremy." David frowned. "What about him?" "You fired him to make room for Melissa." "I restructured the department because he wasn't meeting expectations." "Bullshit." I leaned forward. "You manufactured performance issues to justify firing him so you could hire your girlfriend. He deserves better. What do you want me to do? Rehire him?" "I want you to give him a severance package equivalent to 6 months' salary, a glowing recommendation letter, and connect him with 3 clients who might need freelance work." I paused. "Consider it relationship repair in at least one area of your life." David looked like he might argue, then deflated. "Fine. And I want proof of a company anti-fraternization policy implementation." Now he did look surprised. "Why?" "You're not going to be associated with the company anymore. Because the next Melissa deserves better too." Understanding dawned in his eyes. For perhaps the first time he was seeing me, really seeing me, not as his wife or his adversary, but as a person with legitimate concerns beyond our relationship. "Okay," he said simply. With that single word, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness, I wasn't there yet, might never be, but a tiny fracture in the wall of anger I'd been building, letting in a sliver of something that felt like closure. We parted without further drama. No tearful goodbye, no final embrace, just two people who once shared everything, now carefully dividing the remnants of a life that no longer fit either of us. As I watched him walk away, shoulders slightly stooped under the weight of consequences finally catching up to him, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't brought me joy. The small victories, the psychological warfare, the legal maneuvering, none of it had filled the hole his betrayal had left. It had merely given me purpose during a time when I desperately needed one. The real victory wasn't in making David suffer. It was in discovering my own strength, in learning that I could be calculating when necessary, ruthless when required, and still maintain my fundamental humanity. In understanding that while I couldn't control his choices, I could absolutely control mine. I called Catherine from the parking lot. "He agreed to our terms," I reported, "with the additions we discussed." "Excellent," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "I'll draft the final paperwork. Should be wrapped up within a month." "Thank you for everything." "Just doing my job," she replied, "though I have to say you made it easier than most. Not many clients come to me with tax fraud evidence and a network of cooperative witnesses already in place." I smiled despite myself. "Hell hath no fury, right?" Something like that. A pause. "What will you do now, Emma?" The question caught me off guard. For weeks, my entire focus had been on the divorce, on making David pay, on securing what was rightfully mine. I hadn't thought much beyond that. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Rebuild, I guess. Find out who I am without him. For what it's worth," Catherine said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "I think that person is pretty formidable." After we hung up, I sat in my car watching people come and go from the coffee shop. Normal people living normal lives, untouched by the particular storm that had ravaged mine. 6 months ago, I would have given anything to be one of them again, blissfully unaware of betrayal, still believing in the fundamental solidity of my marriage. Now, I wasn't so sure. That Emma had been happy, yes, but also complacent, trusting to the point of blindness. Willing to make herself smaller to accommodate David's outsized ambitions and ego. This Emma, battle-scarred, clear-eyed, unburdened by illusions, felt more real somehow, more authentic. I started the car and pointed it toward home. My home, soon to be legally, officially, solely mine. As I drove, I made mental notes of changes I wanted to make. Replace the living room furniture. Paint the bedroom a color David would have hated. Convert his office into a proper darkroom for my photography. Small reclamations of space, symbolic conversions from ours to mine. My phone chimed with a text from Mike. "How'd it go?" I considered how to respond. Victory felt too simplistic. It's over. Too final when the emotional aftermath would clearly linger. Finally, I typed, "I'm free," because that ultimately was the truest form of revenge. Not destruction, but liberation. Not making him suffer, but refusing to suffer any longer myself. I pulled into my driveway just as the setting sun cast long shadows across the front yard. In the golden hour light, a photographer's dream, my house looked different somehow. Possibilities stretched before me like the lengthening shadows, distinct and defined yet constantly shifting. Tomorrow, I would call a realtor. Not because David had forced me out, but because I was choosing to go. This house, for all I'd fought to keep it, held too many memories. Too many ghosts of a life that no longer existed. The victory wasn't in possessing it, but in having the freedom to leave it on my own terms. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, closing it firmly behind me. The house was quiet, empty of everything except potential. Just like me. 6 months can change everything. That's how long it's been since I signed the final divorce papers in Catherine's office, accepting a cashier's check that represented my share of the life David and I had built. 6 months since I walked out of that office, no longer Emma Clark but Emma Lawson again, reclaiming my maiden name along with my independence. I sold the house 3 weeks after the settlement, got above asking price from a nice young couple with a toddler and another baby on the way. They loved the renovated kitchen and the built-in bookshelves David and I had argued about for months before installing. I didn't tell them about the arguments or the memories or the broken promises those walls had absorbed. Some things new owners don't need to know. Instead, I took my settlement money and bought a converted industrial loft downtown, the kind of urban, artistic space David had always dismissed as trying too hard. It has concrete floors, exposed brick walls, and massive windows that flood the space with the kind of natural light photographers dream about. More importantly, it has no history except the one I'm creating day by day. My business has flourished, partly because nothing motivates creative rebirth like personal catastrophe. I rebranded, shifting from safe commercial photography to more artistic editorial work I'd always wanted to pursue, but had set aside to focus on stable income for our future family. Turns out my new authentic style resonated with exactly the high-end clients I'd always wanted to attract. Jeremy and I partnered on several projects, his marketing savvy complementing my visual approach. Last month, he landed a creative director position at a respected agency, with the help of that glowing recommendation David reluctantly provided. The severance package allowed Jeremy to upgrade his portfolio and take the courses he needed to level up his career. Sometimes revenge benefits innocent bystanders, too. I hadn't seen David since that coffee shop meeting until today. The charity gala wasn't an event I'd normally attend, but my new client, a non-profit focused on supporting women entrepreneurs, had asked me to photograph it. I'd been circulating through the hotel ballroom for about an hour, capturing candids of Silicon Valley's elite pretending to care about female empowerment, when I spotted him across the room. David looked good. Different, but good. He'd lost the polished, manicured look he'd cultivated during our marriage. His hair was longer, his suit slightly less structured. He was speaking animatedly to a small group, his hands gesturing in that familiar way that once made my heart skip. Now I felt nothing but a dull acknowledgement, like recognizing an actor from a movie you saw years ago. I could have avoided him. The ballroom was large enough that we might have successfully orbited each other all evening without collision, but that felt too much like hiding. So when our eyes finally met across the crowded space, I nodded slightly and continued photographing. 20 minutes later, he approached as I was adjusting my camera settings near the bar. "Your work is everywhere these days," he said by way of greeting. That Vanity Fair spread was impressive. I looked up, somewhat surprised he'd been keeping tabs on my career. "Thanks. It was a good opportunity." Awkward silence stretched between us, filled with the background chatter of San Francisco's wealthiest, discussing how to help women with far fewer resources than themselves. "You look happy," he said finally. "I am." The simplicity of the truth surprised me. No sarcastic comeback, no biting retort. Just the unvarnished reality that I had, against all odds, rebuilt a life I genuinely loved from the ashes of his betrayal. He nodded, absorbing this. "I'm glad." Another pause. "How's Melissa?" I asked, more out of politeness than actual interest. "We're not together anymore." He shifted uncomfortably. "Ended about 2 months after everything." "I'm sorry," I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. He shrugged. "Turns out when you start a relationship through deception, it's hard to build trust." The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. I bit back the urge to point this out. "Growth, Emma. Growth." "How's the business?" I asked instead. "Changed the name. It's Summit Marketing now." "New beginning? Something like that?" He took a sip of his whiskey. "Your brother still wants to kill me, by the way. Ran into him at Russo's last week." If looks could murder, that made me smile. "Mike's protective." "You're lucky to have that." The conversation lapsed again. Once we could talk for hours without running out of things to say. Now 5 minutes felt like an endurance test. "I should get back to work," I said, lifting my camera slightly. He nodded, then hesitated. "Emma, I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry. For all of it. Not just getting caught, but for choosing what I chose. You deserved better." A year ago, I would have killed to hear those words. 6 months ago, I would have thrown them back in his face. Now they simply existed, neither healing nor harming me. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. As he walked away, I realized something profound. The best revenge wasn't in the strategic legal maneuvers or the psychological warfare or even in the tangible gains of house and money. The best revenge was standing here, camera in hand, pursuing work I loved, utterly indifferent to his presence in my world. David no longer had the power to make my heart race, with love or with rage. He was just a person I used to know. A chapter in my story, not the whole book. Later that night, I downloaded the event photos to my laptop, curious despite myself if I'd captured any of David in the background of my shots. I had one candid of him laughing with colleagues, looking carefree in a way he rarely had during our final years together. I studied his image on my screen, searching for any lingering emotion. Anger? Gone. Hurt? Faded. Love? A memory of a memory. What remained was something approaching compassion, not for what he'd done, but for who we'd both been. Two imperfect people who'd hurt each other in different ways, him through betrayal, me through the calculated dismantling of his life afterward. I deleted the photo, not out of anger or pain, but because he no longer belonged in my portfolio, just as he no longer belonged in my life. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Drinks tomorrow? The photographer from the Nelson campaign is joining, said he's a fan of your work." I smiled and typed back, "I'm in." I closed my laptop and walked to those massive windows that had sold me on this loft. The city spread out before me, lights twinkling against the darkness. Somewhere in that constellation of illumination was David, living his life, and here I was, living mine. Separate orbits now, no longer colliding. I thought about the woman who had donated her husband's possessions to Goodwill in a fit of vengeful rage. I barely recognized her anymore, though I understood her completely. She had needed that moment of defiance to propel herself forward, out of victimhood and into agency. But revenge is a vehicle, not a destination. It can carry you away from pain, but can't deliver you to peace. That journey requires something else entirely, the courage to release the past, including the righteous anger that once felt like the only thing keeping you upright. I placed my palm against the cool glass. My city spread out before me like possibility made manifest. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new challenges, perhaps even new love eventually. Not because I was anyone's wife or ex-wife, but because I was Emma Lawson, photographer, friend, survivor, and architect of her own damn life. And that, more than any revenge fantasy fulfilled, was the sweetest victory of all.